Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Real quick, just in case there's anybody here who hasn't been on been to one of these streams before, just want to talk about what on earth we're doing and why a music channel is doing a video game stream. So I am not good at video games. Maybe when I was a kid I was, but not anymore. So what I'm doing is not playing the game well. What I'm going to be doing is editing the files that the game uses to produce its music live, and some of them are going to be interesting, some of them are going to be horrible, and some of them are going to be nonsense. So, as an example, so today we're going to be looking at the original Legend of Zelda for NES. Go ahead and shut that down for a second. And this is the spreadsheet I have prepared for specifically for Zelda. So on these, if you haven't been here before, on these old NES games, of course they couldn't use recorded sound, but the NES also didn't have it wasn't like a MIDI. It didn't have any form of MIDI. Each game was responsible for defining the musical pitches that it was going to use. So if we look at the spreadsheet, and by the way, if you go to the description, on this video, you can download both spreadsheets that we're going to be covering today, both for Zelda and for Super Mario Bros. 3. This spreadsheet lists every note in the note table for the game. So here's the address. The note table for Zelda starts at address 1F10. Starts with G7, which is not, oddly enough, not used in the game that I was able to find, but it's in the note table regardless. And it covers about 57 notes. There's roughly a chromatic scale in the middle, but then in the edges there's just random things that they forgot that they needed, so they threw in later. Now, so this blue box here, this is going to be our original data. So this is what's in the ROM right now. And then that's this spreadsheet's going to convert that to a musical pitch. And we have these yellow boxes here that we can use to modify that. So we'll start with something very basic, which is I'm just going to replace the transposition. Instead of 0, I'm going to enter -12. So that's going to lower each note by an octave, or 12 half steps. So, for example, here, our F# 5 was 9 half steps above the reference note, but after our transposition, it's -3, which means it's going to be an F# 4. So, and then all of those all of these values in the purple box are the altered values. And then down at the bottom, we have a handy little place where I can just copy all of that at once. Then I'm going to open the game in a hex editor. Find starting at 1F10, which is right here, and just paste. So now what I should have is Zelda down an octave. Let's see if everything worked. Now, if you've been to... Oh, sorry, I need to turn up the game volume. Now, if you've been to some of these streams before, you know what's happening on those really low notes, how every once in a while there's a note that just sounds completely off. And that's because even though the spreadsheet is perfectly happy to let you enter really large values, the NES's audio processor only accepts 11 bits. So it's going to cut off the first 5 bits, whatever they are. So sometimes if a note goes really low, it exceeds that 11-bit value and it gets high. And we're going to hear that in a second. Right there. That was a note exceeding the 11-bit timer. Okay, so now that we've covered the basics of what we're doing, let's do something a little more interesting than the transposing it down an octave. Let's replace it. So that was the transposition box. This transformation box, instead of adding or subtracting, it multiplies. So if I replace that with 0.5, that's going to halve the distance between each note and its reference pitch. So here we have B flat 4. It was one half step above. Now it's a quarter step. So we've essentially created quarter tone Zelda. Charles Ives would be thrilled or horrified, one of the two. So I'm going to copy that again. Make plenty of copies. And go into our hex editor. Go to 1F10 and just replace all of that with our new quarter tone music table. So as you're listening, if you have any ideas for things that you'd like to try, go ahead and give them a try in the spreadsheet and share them with chat, and we might be able to try some of them. Xander is suggesting 96 ET, so that's dividing an octave into 96 equal steps. We can get to that. We'll get to that kind of stuff eventually. But we can ease in, maybe. Alright, Ari, I'll check my email and make sure I got what you sent. good time to mention that I never actually owned Zelda as a kid. I had to play it at friends' houses, so I'm not as good at Zelda as I am at Mario, and I'm pretty bad at Mario. Ah, that's disappointing. So, the way that the upper channels work in this track is, instead of one channel playing eighth notes, da 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 da, one channel doing the arpeggios, they're divided between two channels. So that's what it should sound like. But because the game uses the sound channels also for sound effects, because I'm dumb and got damaged, and I'm getting that annoying beeping, one channel is doing that beeping. Alright, let's get the depth sound. Let's see, right now there are 10 concurrent viewers. So I wonder how long I can leave it on here and still keep... Oh, we've already lost one. Okay. Okay, Are, I did get your, So this is... Yeah. So, Are sent in a just intonation music table for Zelda. Now, the issue here is that the NES is only capable of doing... it can't... The NES can't make any arbitrary pitch. It can only do pitches. It's limited by the resolution of the audio processor. And the audio processor runs at about 112 kilohertz. So the... it's going to be quasi-just intonation. Well, I forget how to do a... Anyway, we'll just open that. So, and this is... Now, the limitation here is that, and Are made this, you know, talked about this in his email, is that, there, Are just says it either works or it fails miserably, and I think right there we heard a little bit of it failing miserably. So, just intonation is dependent on what key you're in. So the advantage of equal temperament is it sounds equally good or equally bad in any key. Just intonation is going to sound good in one particular key and varying kinds of not good in other keys. So what Are sent in works in the key of B flat major. But whenever the music deviates from that, not so much. So, Xander, if it depends on how complicated your example is. If you're, so Arde was doing an override to manually tweak the individual pitches. If you're just dealing with a transformation or transposition, if you're only messing with those 3 yellow boxes, then you can just type that directly into chat. So, next up, we're gonna do one that I think always works well, and I'm gonna put in the transformation, I'm gonna do -1. So what that's gonna do is that's gonna invert everything. So B flat, one step above A is going to become G sharp. One step below A. High notes are going to become low notes. Low notes are going to become high notes. I'm also going to transpose it up a little bit after the fact. Actually, this looks okay. Yeah, we don't need to transpose. Yeah, so Zelda inverted. So I got my inverted note table. Copy that in there. Now what we are going to find... Oh, no, never mind. I thought we were going to have some overflow, but we didn't. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, so whenever... I should have listened to that more closely. So whenever we invert the music, that triangle channel that was supposed to be the bass line is now way up high. But since the triangle channel also, just by default, because of how the NES builds the triangle waveform, sounds an octave lower than the square channels, it means that sometimes the triangle channel can interact with the square channel in ways that it didn't originally. Yeah, the inverted music tends to actually sound pretty decent because it's mainly just a modal transformation. So anything that was major becomes Phrygian, and that, that's still listenable. the transformations we do later on are not going to be nearly as listenable. Brock, I don't think Zelda NES, for the NES has, the downside of Zelda is that it has very little actual music. So I think the water level music that you're thinking of came from a different game, or a later game. Yeah, so Xander is right. If anything were in Lydian, which I don't think anything is, it would end up in Locrian when we invert it. Okay, so Brock's saying that he didn't, or he wasn't asking for the water music. He was saying that this reminds him of water music. Yeah, so the creepy stuff tends to sound less creepy when you invert it, and the uncreepy stuff sounds more creepy. I'll die real quick and get the death sound. Let's see. Yeah, so Xander wanted to try 0.955 in the transformation. So that's going to make 13 half steps becomes just slightly over 12. So we're condensing the note table just a little bit, but not in a nice clean pattern. So the result should be a little less should be a little more crunchy than the inverted. He is also saying he wants to make the tuning go flat as it gets higher, and also put in the key of B flat. So we've essentially created a middle school band here. I should have listened to more of that. We'll get back to that. Yes. A human in theory. We'll definitely try something like that. Yeah, it's just close enough to what it's supposed to be that it's recognizable, but it's far enough out of tune to be painful. Okay, so, let's see. So, one that I thought was successful on the Mario was actually a very simple transformation of 2, which essentially turns it into the chromatic scale into a whole step. Or a whole tone scale. Oh, yes. Sorry, we need to get back to the title screen. That's right. So I'm going to do a transformation of 2. So half steps are going to become whole steps. I'm also going to transpose it up an octave so we have fewer of those very low notes. So because of that 11-bit timer, some of these low notes are still going to overflow. So for example, instead of a C-sharp 1, we're going to get an F-sharp 2, because those first 5 bits are going to be cut off. And then after this, we'll try maybe a constant. Vote for your favorite mathematical constant, and we'll do that as a transformation. keep on forgetting that he blocks automatically unless you press the button. Well, yes, I think we've settled on the golden ratio. So, because this song is so high, when we turned it into whole tone, we essentially doubled the distance. So it becomes extraordinarily high. And on the NES, the higher you go, the more out of tune it gets, because once again, we're limited to the resolution of the audio processor. Yeah, so you can hear some of those low notes. Overflowing. Okay, so let's do, we want our golden ratio tuning. So what this is gonna end up somewhat similar to the whole tone, because we're expanding the note table out. High notes become higher, low notes become lower, but it's gonna be much less tonal because we're not doing this in a musically relevant interval. And I'm just gonna glance through this real quick. We have a few overflow notes, so I'm going to transpose it up, let's say a major third, just so we get fewer of those. Yeah. So now we have our golden ratio. Artery, I'm not sure what you mean. You mean so are you saying is that what you're saying? Now, if you look on this spreadsheet, you'll notice that there's another box here called Override Remap. So, what this box is for is if I put Y for yes in that, then it's going to ignore the values from these boxes, the transposition and transformation boxes, and it's going to replace those with the values from over here in the second sheet. So this is useful if you want to do kind of like non-linear transformations. So my favorite, of course, is if we just make it completely random. So let's say I want a random value between -24 and 24. So I'm gonna, if I just use the random function, it's gonna return a random value between 0 and 1. So multiply that by 48, and I'll get a random value between 0 and 48. Then subtract 24. Actually, let's make that 12. And then we'll get a random value between -12 and 36. And now, if we go to our main page again, we'll see that our note table has been thoroughly randomized, not just by half steps, but by microtones as well. So we have a G that's a G5 28 cents flat, followed immediately by a C-sharp 6 that's 2 cents flat. I'm gonna go back to 24. Fewer high notes. There we go. So now, we're gonna copy our random note table. Sorry, you're right, I turned down the volume. I wouldn't want anyone to have difficulty hearing this majestic piece of music. That chromatic scale becomes just a... Xander, are you just trying to do A415? In that case, the easiest thing to do is just do a transposition of -1. And the nice thing about this random is that if we copied and pasted that exact formula in, we would get completely different values. So, if you've downloaded the spreadsheet, you may have noticed that there's a new page that wasn't in the earlier versions, or the spreadsheets for the other games we've done. This is the durations sheet. So, in addition to a note table, these games also have a duration table that defines how long the notes last. And the way that they do this is there are technically 5 note duration tables, each of which has 8 durations in it, although the 4th table isn't used. And so what it's doing is saying that note 3, or duration 3 in table 0, is 20 frames long. And then 5 frames, 40 frames, 60 frames, so on and so on. So it's for the NES, quarter notes, eighth notes, beats per minute, those are all meaningless terms. So it's defining everything in terms of frames. So we could just go through here and multiply all of these by 2. So, and we're going to get a note that's twice as long. And we'll just... So, the duration table begins at 1FE1. So, I'll copy that. Let's see, 1FE1. There it is. And I'm also going to apply a simple transposition down 2 octaves. I figure if we're going to be twice as slow, we might as well be 2 octaves lower. Okay. Okay, so now we should have half tempo, 2 octaves lower. So Arde asked, does the duration only affect how long the note is sustained, or how long until the next note plays? It's how long until the next note is played, and whether that applies to the sustain or not depends on another setting in the music track. So some songs are programmed for each note to last until the next note comes, and others, the notes are programmed to last a certain length. Okay, so Xander will do one more, and then I'd like to move on to Super Mario Brothers 3, because there's actually some. It's a little bit interesting how Super Mario Brothers 3, as a later, more mature NES game, handles its music or its note frequencies differently. Yes, Arde. If you, well, it's a little more. So Arde was asking, if I define the durations. If I define the durations, let's say. Well, let's just say I replace everything with 4. Every note lasts 4 frames now. So, the songs are not... the songs are not... the songs are not in the ROM, the songs are split up into many chunks. So what's going to happen is each chunk is going to get out of sync with itself, and then the moment channel 2 finishes, all of the channels are going to move on to the next chunk. So it's gonna start. They're gonna start in sync. Then there's gonna be like 4 measures where it gets out of sync, and then it's gonna resync. Yeah, so I think if we randomize the durations, I don't think it's going to sound that much different than what we're doing right now. Now, well, here, I'll get to that in a second. Here, we'll listen to random durations real quick. Let's see, we'll just do times, let's see, 40, and then add to that 5. Okay. Yeah, so each track, because each track is essentially its own entity, each track is being randomized differently. Now, there is something in here that I thought was pretty interesting. So, one limitation they're dealing with is they can only make a note, set a note to a duration in full frame increments. So, let's say right here, note table 4, which is used for the victory theme that we're never going to make it to. Yeah, I'll just reset that. So we have what looks like a pretty normal note table, right? 20 would be our quarter note, twice as long as a half note, which is down here. So 40 frames is a half note, 60 frames is a dotted half note, 80 frames is a whole note, 10 frames is a eighth note, and 5 frames is a 16th note. So when I first looked at this, I assumed that the 13 frame and 14 frame notes were errors, just like old code that they never bothered to change. Like this old, like the whole third duration table isn't used. But what I found out was a little more interesting. So if you have, so let's say you want, so a half note is 40 frames. Let's say you want a quarter note triplet. You want to divide those 40 frames evenly in thirds. Well, that's going to be 13 and a third. So that's not going to work. If you defined each quarter note triplet as 13 frames, then after each triplet, it's going to get out of sync by a full frame. So what they did is they have two values that both represent quarter note triplets, a 13 frame note and a 14 frame note. So if they use two of them, or two 13 frames and a 14 frame, that keeps everything in sync. A 13 over 20 uplet is technically what's happening, but I know I couldn't hear that. Okay, so let's do one last Zelda thing. I think Xander wanted to do eighth tones and transposed to by 81 cents. Alright, yes, you could. You could change that to 10 and 20, and then you'd get da 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 instead of da 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 da. Okay, so Xander says that his is 96 tones at 420 hertz. Okay. Uh, I could, but so Artie is asking if I could make that change and then play it. The problem is I don't have a convenient way to access the music that uses that duration table. That's the music that happens when you beat Ganon. And I don't think I'm going to be beating Ganon. Oh, wait. Uh, Let me think. What duration table does the first map, the first, the title theme use? Now, so there is. So, for example, table 1 or table 2, a quarter note is 24 frames. Now, that is evenly divisible by 3. So that might be the table that's being used for the title theme. Is the one that is divisible by 3 anyway. I'm sorry, I keep on forgetting that. Okay, so I think we're gonna call that good for Zelda. Like I said earlier, Zelda doesn't have quite as many tracks to listen to as some of the other games. And let's get into Mario Brothers 3. Now, Mario Brothers 3 is pretty interesting, or it's an interesting how they approach it differently. So, with the games that we've done so far, Zelda, Mega Man, and Mario Brothers 1, they've had a full note table that defines each and every note that's going to be used. Now, an alternative approach would be to just say that, well, we know the base frequency of the audio processor, so we could just calculate the frequency of each note on the fly. Now, I don't know if the NES would even be possible of calculating the 12th root of 2, but it wouldn't be easy. What Mario Brothers 3 does is it takes a middle ground approach of there's one kind of math that even the most simple computer is capable of doing very well, and that's dividing and multiplying by 2. So if I have this number here in binary, and I want to divide that by 2, well, all I have to do is cut off the last digit. If I want to divide that number by 2, cut off that digit, cut off that digit. Now, technically, if I divide this in 2, I'm going to end up with a remainder. But I could just pretend that remainders don't exist and call that close enough. And that's exactly what Mario Brothers does, or Mario Brothers 3 does. Instead of defining 50 or 80 tones, they only define 12 tones. C0 through B0. So the lowest C of a 32-foot stop on an organ. And then they calculate the octave offset, and they truncate that number of bits off the end. So if it needs to be 5 octaves higher than F sharp 0, well, they just chop 5 bits off the end of this. Now, I think it's a much more elegant solution, but the problem is it kind of limits what we can do, because the octave is kind of hardwired into the game. Now, it would be possible there might be some ways to work around that if you know how to program in assembly, but I don't. So we're going to be a little more limited on what we can do in Mario Brothers 3. But there's more music to make up for it. So right off the bat, I'm just going to, we'll do something basic. Transpose everything down by a tritone. Okay, so got that copied data down, and Mario Brothers is about 240 kilobytes, so I'm just going to do a find and replace, or a find to find the beginning of the note table, because I happen to know that B81A is the first note of the note table, and doesn't appear anywhere else in the game. So just copy those 12 values, and we should have Mario Brothers 3 a tritone lower. The volume should... Oh, yeah. Now, another interesting aspect of Mario Brothers 3 is it actually uses that 5th channel that hasn't been used in any of the games before that we've done. So the games that we've done before have had the 2 pulse channels, the triangle channel that's used for the bass, and the noise channel that's used for the percussion. The NES also has a sample channel that allows it to play very limited samples. But the early games didn't use it that much just because of how much data those samples take up. Super Mario Bros. 3 does use that, that kind of timpani sound. Now, as far as I can tell, like the noise channel, the tuning of that sample channel is hard-coded into the audio processor. So I don't know that there's a way to change that, the tuning of the samples, other than to replace all of the music data. Game's too loud? Well, okay. I'll turn it down a little bit, but we do want people to be able to hear the music. I might just scoot closer to the mic. Okay. So, what can we do here? So, I'm going to try... Once again, the octave is kind of hard-coded. We can't do anything about that, but we can make things a little bit weird within that octave. So let's say we do 0 to 2.5, 3, 6. Okay, so I've replaced this chromatic table with a kind of chunky quarter tone table. So we're gonna go C, D, the note in between D and E flat, then E, F sharp, F sharp, F 3/4 step sharp, G, G half sharp, so on and so on. So it's quarter tones, but not all of the quarter tones, because once again, we still need to repeat within the octave because of how the game is programmed. Okay. So Artie asked if I could replace the chromatic scale with a circle of fifths. I mean, yes. I'm trying to think of how that would work with the octave shifted. So, I think what you'd have to do is you can essentially reorder the chromatic scale so that it's in fifths. That would be easy, so alternating up a fifth and down a fourth. Well, darn. But if you just did it straight up by fifths, I think you'd end up with some unlistenable ultrasonic notes way up high. Yeah. So we can try that. I flew too close to the sun. And we can also randomize within the octave. We can also invert it, but it's only going to be... The chromatic scale is going to be inverted, but not the octave itself. Or not the octaves. Alright, so let's try one of those. So, we're going to go up. So yeah, let's, so what's that going to be? How much do we care about just intonation here? 7.02 equals that plus 7.02. So I'll just do all of that and then kind of manually tweak these. Nope. So it's in the right octave. Okay, so that should be our wait. Yeah, I think that's right. I have no idea if I spelled Pythagorean right. I guess we're just gonna let it fly. Oh. Okay, I like this one. Xander, if it's for Mario Brothers 3, you should be able to post it in chat because it's short enough. At least a human in theory was able to. If that doesn't work, let me know. This music being different. Okay. So, I'm gonna delete all of those overrides. I'm gonna real quick just do an inversion. So, this is gonna turn, for example, C's into B's and C sharps into B flats, but it's not going to make low notes high and high notes low. So it's not going to be quite as exciting as the inversions we've done in the other games because that octave limit is hard-coded, but should still be somewhat interesting. Alright, so, Human in Theory wants to try his, or their, Pythagorean 22 tone. I'll just call it a Pythagorean 22 tone subset. We'll see what happens here. Okay. So Xander, if you sent in something, it didn't come. So you might try sending it to rbobo@subcontrabassoon.com. If I mean, I can only imagine there are good reasons why the YouTube chatbot would automatically remove things that appear to be raw hex code. Generally, people that are trying to enter raw hex code into chat probably have nefarious purposes. But sometimes it seems to be going through okay, and other times not. Yes, Arte, I got your circle of force. Okay, so I'm gonna try real quick one of my favorite random so we're just gonna randomize the octave. Yeah, so I think one of the most noticeable parts of the past randomizing has been the octaves being random, or the kind of the true random. So this, it's a little less satisfying for me anyway. Okay, so what did Xander send? Okay. So Xander is calling this 121st to the 3rd parabolic tuning. let's do our, so Are sent in a circle of fourths. Let's see, B1A. What's going on here? Okay, something's not going right there. Let's see. Okay. I didn't like how that was copy and pasted somehow. So let's do, I'm a little interested what's going to happen if we do a transformation of 2. So that's, okay, so a chromatic scale is going to become 2 whole tone scales, and some of the octaves will be interesting. But it should still be appreciably a whole tone. So, Stereo, I'm looking into the non-Pythagorean scale you mentioned. I haven't heard of that personally. Okay, so, Stereo, I'll look into the non-Pythagorean scale more lately. I think I'm going to need to look into it a little more closely to make sure that I implement it correctly. I don't think me trying to figure it out live on stream is going to work too well. Okay. So, like I said, because of how they handle this, Mario 3 is a little more limited than the other games. But I did think it was interesting how they handled the octave shift and didn't, instead of needing to define 60 separate note tables. Alright, so I'm going to plug in real quick a Human in Theory posted a hexachord scale. So I'm going to go ahead and post that real quick. If anyone has any last suggestions for Super Mario Bros. 3, or if you have any ideas for an NES game with good music that I might consider looking into for a future stream. Okay. So we have our... Okay. For some reason, it does not... Whenever I copy and paste directly from the YouTube chat, it doesn't like that. I wonder what's going on. One, two, three, four. Okay. Connery's suggesting we do more of the original Super Mario Brothers. I don't know, I kind of feel like we've done all of the variations. Well, okay, not all of the variations, but I feel like we've covered a lot on the original Mario Brothers. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, Castlevania is an interesting one. I'll be honest, you know, back when I was kids, we normally, you know, you had like 5 NES games and that was your library. So I never had Castlevania, but I can look into it. Now, I can't guarantee anything until I've been able to look at it, because it may be that the code is inscrutable or just beyond me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So this is, I'm just going to call this the Xander's sine and tangent ascending linear. I'll be honest, I don't know what exactly you mean by that, but we're about to listen to it. So, I have something I'd like to do. Let's just do I don't know, something like 0.08. Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's do. Okay. So I'm going to do a transformation by 112. So everything. Oh, wait. No, never mind. I'm okay. I thought I just messed up. Okay, so this is going to be cramming a chromatic scale into a half step. B8 1A. Got that. wait, why isn't that going? Okay. So apparently people are mailing graphs, or emailing graphs to one another. Okay, so I think I'm gonna get to maybe run through the end of the World 1 and then call it a stream. But it's been fun for me. Hopefully it's, you know, been tolerable for you all as well. Alright, let's see if we can beat the castle with the dissonance going on. Yeah, so since the two square channels are in close harmony in the original, now that we've crammed them so close together, it's that kind of it's that very, very close dissonance. But every time Mario jumps, since it's one of the channels is silenced in order to do the sound effects, it all of a sudden sounds better. Alright. Well, I think we're going to have to call that a stream. Once again, thank you all so much for coming. If you have any ideas for suggestions for a future stream, either on one of the games we've already done or a completely different game entirely, leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, stay safe and have a great day.